Pick a side. Do you open the diary you weren't meant to find, or pretend you never saw it and live with the itch in your brain forever? I opened it. And the pages didn't just tell me who my wife used to be, they told me who might be coming for us. Hi Reddit. I'm a 33-year-old guy from Ohio, married 3 years, the kind of man who fixes squeaky cabinet doors at midnight because the sound gets under my skin. My wife Ava is tidy, private, and sweet in a way that makes you feel safe without her even trying. Last month we were clearing out the attic because the insulation guys were scheduled for the weekend. I was knee-deep in Christmas bins and ancient tax folders when I found a shoebox pushed way back behind a rafter like it had been jammed there in a hurry. It was wrapped in grocery bag paper and 2 layers of blue painter's tape. The top had this tiny heart drawn in pen, almost invisible from dust. I only opened it because I thought it might be old photos I could surprise her with later. Inside was a battered, cloth-bound diary, canvas cover, corners frayed, pages swollen from humidity and maybe tears. The first page hit like a shovel. If you're reading this, our past caught up. Underneath, a name I didn't recognize, Evan Mercer. The date on that entry was 7 years before I met Ava. My wife's handwriting filled the rest, except she signed several entries Anna, not Ava. I sat on the attic floor, insulation crunching under my knees, and the house suddenly felt too small for all the air in it. I skimmed faster than I could think. It wasn't just I dated a jerk. It was courthouse marriage, isolated apartment, broken phone, a sequence of apologies and new rules, bank accounts taken for our future, the classic love bomb to leash arc but written with terrifying clarity from inside it. There were pages about him waiting in the parking lot when her shift ended, about him counting the pills in her Tylenol bottle, about the night with the bathtub faucet left on and a bruise shaped like the curve of a faucet handle. I left like it was a fire alarm. She described stashing cash inside a hollowed-out book, using a prepaid flip phone a coworker gave her, and catching a 5:40 a.m. bus while Evan was out on a work call, a friend waiting with a borrowed car and a new prepaid SIM. Another entry: if this ends badly, tell my mom I'm sorry for leaving the plant on the windowsill. I don't know how long I sat there. I heard the garage door and almost dropped the diary down between the joists. When Ava called up the stairs, I slid the book back in the shoebox and pushed it into the dark out of sheer panic, like a kid hiding a failing report card. I told myself I'd bring it up after dinner, explain the insulation project detour, ask her to fill in the missing years in her own words. Instead, I cooked chicken and pretended to listen to a story about her new manager, and the second her fork hit the sink I heard it, my phone buzzing on the counter with a no-caller ID number. I didn't answer. It buzzed 3 more times while we watched a comedy where the married couple's biggest fight was about paint colors, and I wanted to crawl out of my skin because, in our house, there was a bomb in a shoebox and a number with no name trying to push through the wall. I didn't sleep. When Ava's breathing leveled out, I went back to the attic, folded a towel over the edge of the hatch so the ladder wouldn't clatter, and brought the diary downstairs like I was carrying a live animal. I read on the couch with the TV muted to ESPN highlights so it looked normal if she wandered out for water. The diary wasn't just memories, it was meticulous. Dates, names, bus routes, the address of a women's shelter scribbled 3 times like a mantra. She wrote about a legal aid clinic clerk whispering, "We can get a protective order today," and Evan showing up at the courthouse parking lot before she could sign anything. She wrote about him crying in the driver's seat, pounding the wheel, swearing he just wanted to talk, and then the cold pivot: "If I can't have you, Anna, nobody can," his hand on her jaw so hard she tasted blood. She got away because a security guard walked past at the right second. There were entries about changing her name. Not legally at first, just restaurant name tags, temp agency paperwork, post-it notes by a new phone. Ava repeated 12 times until the letters looked like they belonged to her. She made friends in a floral shop. She learned how to carry a set of keys between her fingers. She screenshot a quote that said, "Some men love like booby traps. They make the flowers look safe." She moved cities, then moved again. The last pages turned practical job notes, schedules, to-do lists, like a life finally smoothing out, like a heartbeat finally leaving a sprint. The final entry before blank paper: "If I ever stop checking the door twice, it's because I believed I survived." In the silence, my phone buzzed on the cushion. No caller ID. I stared until it stopped, then opened our door camera app and scrolled the history. At 1:16 a.m. The porch light flicked on by motion and recorded 22 seconds of our empty steps, a moth pinging the bulb, a shadow sliding along the sidewalk like someone standing just out of frame. Could have been a cat. Could have been the wind. Could have been anything. I told myself to breathe and put the diary back where I found it because it felt wrong to hold it any longer without her consent. The tape peeled off the box like old skin. I smoothed it flat and slid the box behind the beam again, then stood in the attic a full minute with the light off to hear if the house wanted to tell me anything I was too dumb to hear. The next morning I made coffee like a man in a commercial. I waited until she was halfway through her mug and said, "I found something in the attic yesterday." For a second she didn't move at all, like she had practiced the pose of a person not moving. Then she set the mug down carefully, folded her hands, and said without looking at me, "The blue tape?" I nodded. She closed her eyes and exhaled a breath I didn't know she'd been holding since before I met her. Okay, she said. Then I guess you need to hear the version with all the parts one hoped I'd never say out loud. We sat at the table with our phones face down and the oven clock blinking 9:03 because the power had flickered during a storm a week ago and I never said it. Ava didn't touch her coffee. She twisted the ring on her finger so gently I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't studying her like a detective who still loves his suspect. She said his name like she was testing it for poison, Evan. They met at 24 when she was living in a sketchy studio with a mattress on the floor and a view of a brick wall. He was blonde, good with eye contact, helpful in a way that feels like God sent him when your car dies in the grocery lot and all your friends have early mornings. First month was flowers at work, second was a spare toothbrush, third was I covered your cell bill, babe, I'm good for it, fourth was a lease with his name first because credit score optics, fifth was a wedding at a courthouse with a judge who mispronounced her last name. Then rules. Then I didn't say you couldn't see her, I said I don't like her vibe. Then passwords. Then the guy at the bar who looked at her too long because your dress says ask for it. She said it happened slowly, then all at once. The bathtub night was the line. She told me in 6 sentences that took the top layer off it so she could speak without shaking, the door locked, music loud, him kneeling beside her just talking, the faucet she didn't remember turning on, her ears filling with the sound of cheap porcelain pipes, his hands making shapes in the air like measuring the distance between her mouth and the surface. It ended with neighbors pounding because water dripped into the ceiling below. She left 2 weeks later with a prepaid phone and $53 cash, and her boss counted coins out of a jar to make it an even 100 because some people are the only reason other people live. She changed her name after a year because he found her twice, the courthouse lot and once on a bus where he sat 2 rows behind and whispered, "You have a tell when you lie, Anna," and smiled with a chipped cuspid that she still finds by instinct when she sees blonde men at a distance. Did you ever file anything? I asked like a coward, meaning police reports, restraining orders, anything on paper that ends a story. I did, she said. And he appealed. Or disappeared. Or reappeared with nicer clothes. Paper was his hobby. He loved rules when he could write them. She rubbed her wrist where a thin white line arcs like a faded bracelet. She said the last contact was 4 years ago. He messaged from an unknown account with a photo of the sidewalk outside her apartment and the words, "I'm proud of who you're trying to be." She moved 2 weeks later. She met me 6 months after that. I wanted to be angry she hadn't told me. She beat me to it. I wanted to bury him, she said. And the only way I knew to bury anything was to stop giving it oxygen. We were quiet long enough for the air to get heavy. I finally said, "We're not burying anything now." She looked relieved and terrified at the same time. When I showed her the no-caller ID logs, she nodded like she expected to see them and hated that she expected to see them. "It could be a spam dialer," she said. "It could be a wrong number." Then the doorbell rang. I didn't jump. I teleported. The doorbell cam sent a push notification and my thumb hit it so fast I dropped the phone. An Amazon box sat on the mat, unremarkable size, no smile logo, just the generic brown tape you buy a 20-pack of on a website that knows your sock size. I told myself it was the filters I'd ordered for the HVAC. I told myself not to make a scene. I opened it on the kitchen island with a butter knife because somehow using a Rayol knife felt like escalating whatever game the universe was playing. Inside the box was another box, black, tied with a pale blue ribbon like a high-end bakery. No postage label on the inner box, meaning whoever sent it either overboxed it, or delivered the inner box by hand and then used the outer for camouflage. Under the ribbon was a folded card that smelled faintly of a department store perfume I couldn't place. Ava opened it before I could stop her. The front had a simple embossed egg inside, block letters and black felt tip, "Congratulations on 3 years. I still remember your tell. E." The room shrank. Ava's eyes went to the window like the message came through the glass. I looked at the door camera history again. Motion at 1:16 a.m., that moth pinging the bulb, no person in frame. Another motion alert at 5:42 a.m., a shadow at the edge of the porch. Barely a shoulder. A blur that could be a jacket. I wanted the box to be empty, a stupid flex that fizzles in daylight. Under the card was tissue paper, neatly folded. Under that, another layer of blue painter's tape. She peeled it back with a steadiness I didn't recognize as courage until later. Inside lay a cheap spiral notebook, the exact brand as her old diary. First page blank. Second page blank. Third page, a photograph tucked into the spiral and held by a single piece of scotch tape. It was our living room. Our couch. Our throw blanket thrown not the way we throw it. The photo was taken from outside the window at night, probably through the crack where the curtain doesn't meet the wall unless you tug it, the lens catching the reflection of a man's silhouette if you zoomed in high enough to turn pixels into guesses. The timestamp in the corner was 12:03 a.m. The same night we heard nothing and slept like amateurs. I didn't realize I'd already called 911 until the operator said, "Sir?" And I heard my own voice describing a man who might not be in the picture but very much was in the room with us. When the officers arrived, the first one did the thing they do where they ask you the same questions twice just to hear if the answers match because humans are bad at consistency when they're panicking. He was kind without playing dumb. He took the card in a plastic sleeve, dusted the box for prints, asked about prior incidents, prior names, prior addresses, and in the silence that followed I watched my wife lower her head like she was doing something wrong by surviving long enough to need police again. They canvassed, they took the footage, they told us to upgrade our deadbolts and get motion lights on the side yard. You know how it goes, the officer said gently, not to dismiss us, just to warn us of the dumb pattern, a gift, a photo, a lull, a knock you don't answer, a blurred face in the background of your own life. Ava held it together until the cruiser turned the corner. Then she went to the bathroom and threw up quietly, the way someone who's had to throw up quietly throws up. Practical mode saves you. It's not brave, it's muscle memory. I installed a secondary lock plate and a door bar on the front door and a camera above the side gate. I replaced the flimsy back door strike with a 3-inch screw set that disappeared into the stud like driving stakes into a vampire. I bought a cheap set of driveway alarms and put one under the mulch by the fence so it would chirp if someone stepped where they shouldn't be stepping. I scheduled a locksmith to rekey everything and made copies like I was issuing badges in a spy movie. I asked Ava to send me any photo she had of Evan that wasn't already burned, deleted, or ripped in half. She didn't, but she described his face in a way that made me see him anyway: right canine chipped, left eyebrow scar from a bicycle accident, a dimple only on the left when he smiled for effect, a birthmark behind his ear shaped like an imperfect comma. I wrote it down because writing helps when breathing doesn't. I called a buddy who runs a strip mall IT shop and asked if he'd help me track no-caller ID calls back as far as the carrier would let a lawful citizen. He said he couldn't legally pull anything I wanted, then texted me a Reddit thread about how spoofing works and which VoIP services are popular among creeps who are 2 steps above stupid. I changed our numbers anyway. 2 days later the new numbers got their first no-caller ID pings. Ava stopped making eye contact with the door when she walked past it, which told me she was making eye contact with the door every second she wasn't walking past it. That night she asked if we could sleep with the lamp on. She apologized before and after asking. I said yes because obviously yes. Around 2 a.m., the driveway alarm chirped. The sound is tiny, like a digital watch in a gym bag, but at 2 a.m., it's a siren. I looked at the camera feed and saw nothing. I texted my neighbor Tom ex-Army, early riser, and asked if he'd seen anyone out front. He said he was on nights this week but the guys across the street had a ring floodlight. 15 minutes later my phone buzzed with a clip, a figure at the edge of our lawn at 1:59 a.m., head down, hoodie up, walking like someone trying to remember how to look casual. The floodlight triggered and the figure didn't flinch, just angled away, like he'd already counted how far the light reached. We sent the clip to the detective who'd taken our case. He said, "We'll add it to the file," which is either bureaucracy or a spell to keep you calm. The next morning a white envelope without a stamp sat under our doormat, the kind you buy in a bulk pack. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a spiral. 3 words in those same block letters: check your voicemail. I did. New message. Private number. 33 seconds of breathing and then a man's voice, conversational and cheerful, like a podcast host. "Hey, Anna." Or Ava. You always were good with names. It's weird how you never told him about the cabin. I hope he's not the jealous type. You could take him there. Show him where you learn to trust the dark. Then a click. I didn't know there was a cabin. I didn't know there was a version of my wife who had a cabin. She stared at the floor and said, quietly, "I hoped it burned down in my memory." We didn't go to work. We packed a bag and drove north. The cabin was 2 hours and 15 minutes from our driveway if you drive like you need an answer more than you need your license. Halfway there Ava started talking without looking away from the road, words coming like a leak she finally stopped trying to plug. The cabin wasn't theirs, it was his uncle's fishing place where winters are for the wood stove and summers are for pretending you're the kind of man who doesn't look at your phone. They stayed 3 weekends the first spring, then 1 week that became a test. That's where she learned the rules that weren't rules, the little scripts you repeat to stop fights before they start. That's where she hid a prepaid phone in the rim of a spare tire. That's where she learned that trees make silence feel like a wall you can press against until you find a door. The cabin sat back from the county road behind a stand of pines that do that whisper thing when wind moves across them, like someone telling a secret you can almost catch. The padlock on the porch door was new. The key under the third step was not. Inside smelled like dust, mouse droppings, and wood smoke 9 winters old. The windows were dirty enough to turn noon into dusk. The kitchen table had the same knife marks in it that most cabin tables have, a topography of deer season. Under the sink was the thing I didn't know I was looking for until I found it, a cigar box with a prepaid flip phone, dead now but scabbed with masking tape where you'd put a number you couldn't afford to forget. Under the phone was a photo of Ava, Anna then, sitting on the porch steps with the world's fakest smile, eyes gone like someone had stolen the glass right out of them. Behind the cabin, under the loose board she told me to check like she was reciting a spell, was a Ziploc with cash, a birth certificate copy, an old library card, and a single silver key with store 14B stamped into it. She hadn't been back since she left. The fact that the key was still there felt like a coin flip coming up on its edge. We drove to a storage place 20 minutes away with a faded sign and a manager who sells sodas out of a cooler behind the desk because the vending machine died in 2019 and he refuses to call it. Unit 14B was halfway down the second row. The lock looked untouched. Inside, boxes. Not a horror movie worth of boxes. Just enough that a woman could start over 3 times without paying baggage fees. Clothes. A set of dishes wrapped in old newspaper. Another diary I wasn't prepared for, smaller, pocket-sized, elastic band snapped but holding on. We sat on the concrete and read together. It was a log, not a confession, dates of sightings, a black SUV parked across from a grocery for 39 minutes, the time a florist saw Evan buying lilies like he lost something he never had, the day a neighbor called to say a man knocked and asked if Anna still lived here and then smiled when she said no. The last entry was a single sentence: if I'm not writing, I'm running. There was a second cooler in the back, blue igloo, clean. Under it, taped to the floor, a cheap track phone with a battery at 77% and one number in its contacts named River. It's not his, Ava said. It's the friend who helped me leave. I wanted to call River immediately. Ava wanted to wait for dark. She said phones sing when you think they're whispering. I said we don't get to be poetic about our safety. She said, please. We compromised. We bought a burner of our own. We drove to a town over and used a library computer to set up a fresh email and send one line to River's contact handle from the diary: is Anna safe? The reply hit before we got back to the car. Where are you and who else is reading this? We met River in the back corner of a diner that looks like every diner you've ever seen if your brain files memories under coffee rings. River isn't a name so much as a function. She flows around obstacles and erodes things that pretend to be permanent. Mid-40s, hair short, hoodie zipped high, an expression that could be a smile or a test depending on what you say next. She hugged Ava so gently I wanted to build a house out of the way she hugged. River ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese and told us she had exactly 40 minutes before she had to be somewhere that sounded like court without saying the word court. She said Evan was the kind of man who solves boredom by inventing problems he can fix. He works as an independent consultant, which is a term men like when it doesn't mean anything. He has an extended family, none of whom would admit to an emergency even if they were bleeding at your booth. He plays at being useful, which gets him close to vulnerable people who mistake movement for progress. She said the last time she saw him he was volunteering at a food pantry, charming in a way that looks like goodness until you realize goodness is what he uses to pick locks. She said he'd asked about Anna in a way that wasn't asking. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked Ava, like there was a version of that question that wasn't the wrong one. Because every time I say his name out loud he gets a little more real, she said. River slid me a scrap of paper with 3 steps on it. 1. Document everything. Screenshots, times, dates, plates. 2. Control your own signals. New numbers won't matter if devices are mirrored. Get a clean phone and a clean account for anything private. 3. Don't do his work for him. Don't move the way he wants you to. Don't pick the fights he throws like bait. Also, she added, do the boring stuff: locksmith, camera, neighbors, cop friend. Boring saves lives. On the way back to the car my burner buzzed with an email to the brand new address we'd only given River. Subject: still good with names. The body was a single photo, Ava and me at the storage unit an hour earlier, angled from across the lot. Either he was physically there, or he had help. Either way, the message worked. That night, back home, the power died at 11:41 p.m. The block went dark for 3 minutes, then everything came back but the living room lamp and the porch light, which stayed dead like they'd made a separate deal with the night. Through the window, our street looked like a stage set after the actors go home. My phone buzzed. No caller ID. I answered because sometimes fear wants to hear its own name said out loud. Miss me? He asked, light, almost bored. Want me to knock, Anna? Or should I knock for him? I told Ava to go to the bathroom and lock the door, then used the second phone to call 911 while I stayed on with the piece of garbage who thinks names are knives. I hit speaker so if I went quiet, the recording would keep talking for me. You're trespassing, I said, because my brain is a lawyer when it panics. He chuckled, a sound like cheap silverware in a drawer. I'm not anywhere, buddy. I'm an idea. That's the problem with ideas, you can't arrest them. Outside, something scraped, the sort of sound a branch makes against siding if the branch knows your name. The side gate creaked. The driveway alarm chirped. The porch camera pushed a dead notification because the porch light still wouldn't come back. In the bathroom I heard Ava whisper our address to the dispatcher with the precise tone of someone who's practiced not crying underwater. I told Evan his name like I was puncturing a balloon, Evan Mercer. He went quiet for half a breath. Don't do that, he said, still friendly, like we were at a barbecue. Names stick to things. You throw mine around and it might stick to you. He started to say something else and then the house did a thing I didn't expect. The basement motion sensor snapped on and pinged my phone, meaning someone or something moved in a part of our house only we use. I had a camera down there because I'm the kind of guy who thinks some pumps are out to ruin his weekends. It came up black for a second, then resolved into the dim outline of the water heater and a shape moving past it, too fast to make sense of, too slow to be a glitch. I told the dispatcher we had motion inside and the operator's voice went calm in a way that makes other people calm. Sirens started somewhere close. I hung up on Evan because sometimes dignity is just choosing who gets to be in your ear. Back door, I whispered to the dispatcher as a second chirp came from the kitchen window sensor, and she said, "Stay where you are. Officers are on your street now." The kitchen camera grabbed a frame, a shoulder in a dark jacket, a hand in a glove like the kind you buy at the hardware store when you're pretending to be a contractor. The deadbolt held. The door bar held. The window lock was new as of last week and I loved it the way people love dogs that bite the right ankles. Red and blue washed the front room. A voice on a PA told someone to come out slow. Another voice answered from the alley that separates our house from Mr. Chen's fence, hands. Then the sound that changes your blood boots fast on concrete, a shout, metal on metal, a body choosing ground. They didn't bring him through the front. They left with someone, not him. The sergeant at our kitchen table 20 minutes later explained what my heart already knew. They caught a guy with a camera and a lockpick set. Not our guy. A guy. He says he was paid cash to check access, the sergeant said, disgust curling the edge of his mouth. We'll book him. We'll flip him if we can. Ava stared at the kitchen floor like it might blink a message in Morse if she watched long enough. My phone buzzed. An email from an address we'd never seen, you're learning. The body, a photo of the man in handcuffs, taken from the trees across the street while the patrol car's lights painted him red and blue. Here's the part I'm not proud of, I wanted to hunt. Not in a be the hero way. In a take back the part of my wife's brain he rented for years way. River warned me when we met again at the diner 2 days later. He will make you think action is the cure, she said. Sometimes survival is boring on purpose. Ava squeezed my hand under the table and I squeezed back but my head still buzzed with maps. We gave the detective everything: emails, clips, times, dates, plate numbers from a silver Civic that showed up twice across our street at stupid o'clock. They ran it. It belonged to a woman whose social feeds are public and whose selfies look like a person who thinks she's dating a man named Ian who works nights and likes lilies. The detective sighed the sigh of a man who has seen every version of a bad pattern and told us he'd knock on her door, gently. That evening our porch light finally came back like it had forgiven us. We slept with it on. At 3:11 a.m., the driveway alarm chirped and I didn't run to the window. I watched the feed and recorded my hands not shaking. A figure stood across the street, hood down, looking smaller than the stories in my head. He didn't move for almost a minute. Then he raised a hand and gave a tiny gesture, a two-finger salute, dismissive, practiced. My gut went cold because the gesture was for her. The next day, with the detective's blessing, we baited him with something only a narcissist sees as food, a narrative. I posted a photo on my barely used Facebook of a paint swatch fan and a caption about finally repainting the living room this weekend. Wish me luck. Within 2 hours an email arrived at the burner, a photo of a paint store aisle with a circled brand and the words, "Try Winter Fog." It hides stains. The detective put a car on the paint store lot. River sat at a table by the window doing a crossword she didn't fill in. Ava waited in our car, engine running, hands on the wheel like she might need to leave the earth. I went in and pretended to care about trim enamel. Evan took the bait the way men like Evan take any bait that tastes like control. He walked in 15 minutes later wearing a baseball cap and glasses that were a size off his face like he bought them at a gas station. He browsed 3 aisles past me, then stood where the camera in the ceiling could grab his jawline. When he turned to leave, River stood and stepped into him like wind. "Anna asked me to say hi," she said, perfectly casual. He smiled with that dimple only on the left and said, "You must have me confused with someone," and the dimple disappeared and the jaw went hard and the scar at the eyebrow tugged his skin when he frowned and the comma birthmark peeked behind his ear when the cap shifted because he wanted her to remember the specific geography of him. The detective outside let him walk because you don't break a box with your fist if you're trying to collect everything inside it. 2 blocks later a patrol car made a stop for a turn signal violation that maybe wasn't. They found 2 phones, one fresh, one ancient, a camera with photos of 3 houses on our street, a ring of keys that weren't his, and a notebook with 3 names in block letters. Mine. Ava's. River's. He made bail because of course he made bail. The judge issued a protective order because the law sometimes reaches the right shelf. Ava threw up in the diner bathroom and came back with her hair wet like she'd washed the part of herself that hears footsteps. I drove us home in daylight because daylight is the currency you spend when you can. I wish the end was clean. I wish I could say he disappeared when paper finally said his name with teeth. He didn't. He got quieter. Quieter is worse because you start to think you invented the noise. The calls dwindled. The emails went from taunts to scripture length nothing. The porch light stayed on without apology. We did the exact things River told us to do, documented, bored ourselves into safety, made routines that looked like bricks. The detective called when the woman with the silver Civic filed her own report. Her Ian was gone, along with her spare house key and the sense that her favorite coffee shop was still hers. A month later, a different county filed something bigger with a number attached that felt like a beginning of the end. We'll have to show up and speak. Ava says she's ready to tell the truth with her eyes open this time. She says Anna like she's reading a stranger's name on a package and carrying it to the right door. We kept the diary. Not in the attic. On a shelf you can see from the couch because secrets rot in boxes. Some nights I still hear our driveway alarm chirp even when it doesn't. Some nights a moth hits the porch bulb and my brain plays a highlight reel it didn't ask for. We planted a motion light in the side yard that's so bright even raccoons look offended. I took Ava back to the cabin, not to hunt ghosts, but to change the lock so even memory has to knock now. I left a note in a Ziploc under the loose board where the key used to be. It says, she lives here now, but not with you. If you're reading this for advice, I'm not wise. I didn't do anything a decent person with a hardware budget and a stubborn streak wouldn't do. But I learned this: evil likes to be seen. It wants an audience. It wants you to narrate it, to argue with it, to stand under its porch light. Don't. Document. Get boring. Get loud with paper. Tell your neighbors. Learn your angles. Hug your people like River hugs. And if you find a diary in your attic with a name you never heard, don't pretend you didn't see it. Love Without Knowing is a sitcom. Love with Knowing is a house you can sleep in. I still get no caller ID sometimes. I don't always answer. When I do, I say my wife's real name, the one she chose, like it's both a prayer and a password. And then I hang up. And then we eat dinner with the porch light on. And then we check the door twice, not because we're afraid, but because surviving is a habit you keep even when the habit is all that's left of the monster you beat.